Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm quite pleased to have so many people here. I see something like 64 people now. As I said, this meeting is being recorded. You may use the chat for your questions, and perhaps later on you can also raise your hand, but it's so much easier to use the chat due to the high number of people in the audience. I'm Bruno von Lutz. I'm the director of the German-American Institute in Saarland. Let me welcome you to a talk which couldn't be of greater interest right now. I'm pleased to welcome Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, and I'm also pleased to announce a cooperation with ASCO Europa-Stiftung, Maike Kartes, and die Deutsche Atlantische Gesellschaft, Dr. Horst Dörrenbecher. Maike, I'll pass the mic on to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, welcome also from my side, and it's very nice to see that so many people connected with us tonight. On behalf of the board of ASCO Europa-Stiftung, I would like to welcome you to our event together tonight with our cooperation partners. And first and foremost, I would like to welcome you, Frederick Benjamin Hodges, to our talk. You are regularly seen on German and American TV channels, and later on, you will further introduce Mr. Ben Hodges. And today I would also like to welcome the many live connected guests from Saarland and the region and all over Germany that I see. But also we have seen some of our international partners and organizations, and even the European Commission did give a sign to connect with us tonight. The work of ASCO Europa-Stiftung is aimed at initiating and accompanying the dialogue between civil society, politics and science. And in particular, we would like to sensitize young people from Germany, that's our job, and abroad, to important current issues in Europe and create encounters. And especially in times of war and disunity, it is all the more important, in our view, to offer platforms for exchange and togetherness and encounter. So we want to bring people together, and tonight only virtually, but now I want to hand over back to Mr. Dörrenbecher first. And I think you have a mic for yourself. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm particularly pleased to see you again, General Hodges, because I still remember very well when you were in Saarbrücken 2 years ago. That's why I'm particularly interested in your statements and in your views on the topic. And I'm sure that we get elaborated answers. In particular, our field of interest is the NATO, the transatlantic relations, and therefore, whenever it's possible, I would like to ask you questions or statements about the topic, of course. Anyway, I'm very pleased to see you, Mr. Hodges.
Okay, let me introduce Ben Hodges. I have known him for some years now. We first met during a hike across the so-called Hunnenring in Saarland. Locals will know what I'm talking about. And the guided tour through the town of Homburg here in Saarland, which has various connections to the United States. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges holds the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis. He joined this organization in February 2018. A native of Quincy, Florida, General Hodges graduated from the United States Military Academy in May 1980 and was commissioned in the infantry. This was the start of a distinguished military career. After his first assignment as an infantry lieutenant in Galstedt, this is in northern Germany, he commanded infantry units at the company, battalion and brigade levels in the 101st Airborne Division, including command of the 1st Brigade Combat Team Bastogne of the 101st Airborne Division in Operation Iraqi Freedom 2003 and 4. His other operational assignments include Chief of Operations for Multinational Corps Iraq in Operation Iraqi Freedom 2005 and 6, and Director of Operations Regional Command South in Kandahar, Afghanistan 2009 and 10. General Hodges also served in a variety of joint and army staff positions to include tactics instructor, chief of plans, 2nd Infantry Division in Korea, aide de camp to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, chief of staff, 18th Airborne Corps, director of the Pakistan-Afghanistan Coordination Cell on the Joint Staff, chief of legislative liaison for the United States Army, and commander NATO Allied Land Command in Izmir, Turkey. His last military assignment was as commanding general for the United States Army Europe in Wiesbaden in Germany from 2014 to 17. He retired from the US Army in 2018, in January 2018. In 2021, he published the book Future War and the Defense of Europe for the Oxford University Press with General John R. Allen and Professor Julian Lindley French, both experts in their fields. Russia's war against Ukraine has changed the structure of European-American relations decisively. It has changed German-American relations. It has led to a sea change in the German attitude towards its military responsibilities and involvements. And it has also led to a major rethinking of the German energy policy, in particular of its perceived dependency on Russian gas and oil. Then, well knowing that the situation changes day by day, I would like to ask you nevertheless about your thoughts about the current state of affairs with respect to the military relations and the situation in Ukraine itself. Ben, over to you.
So, Bruno, all of you, thank you for the privilege of your time tonight. And I know that I am competing with excellent weather, so thanks for that. What I'd like to do is use about 7 minutes to put on the table a few key points and then look forward to the conversation, to the questions, but also to challenges if you think I got it wrong. And I know there are some real experts listening tonight. First of all, the current situation. I believe that we are in the decisive phase of this campaign. That what happens over the next 3 weeks will determine whether it is a short campaign or one that goes on for years more. If we, the West, decide to win, that doesn't mean US or Bundeswehr troops in Ukraine, but if we decide that we want to win, not just keep Ukraine in the fight, then I think we have the chance to break the back of the Russian military right now. While they are vulnerable, while they are trying to reconstitute, while they are preparing for the next phase. We have an opportunity here that can enable Ukraine to get to a much better negotiating position, which at minimum means Russian forces back to the pre-24 February line. We have a window of opportunity of 2 to 3 weeks based on my assessment of what Ukraine has and how long it will take for the Russians to be fully back up on their feet. The Russian failures, I think, are probably well known. All of you that are paying attention have been watching this, whether it was about logistics, the plan, the command structure, the failure to be able to bring together what we call joint effects of air, land, sea, special forces. They've never been able to synchronize them. And so they transitioned to a war of attrition, which means you have to have a lot of people and you have to have a lot of ammunition. I don't think they have either. So they have adopted a medieval approach. And clearly the Russians are the same brutal force that murdered 22,000 Polish officers and elites in Katyn in 1940. It's the same, these are the same ones. But they are not stupid. And they're going to learn from all the mistakes that have been made over the past several weeks. They've already fixed one of the main problems was the failure to have one commander for the entire theater. They've selected General Vornikov, who appears to have some experience, at least in Syria, although obviously the environment there is significantly different from the environment he is facing now in Ukraine. On the Ukrainian side, I'm not surprised that Ukrainian soldiers have done well. We've watched them for the last several years as we help train them, Americans, Canadians, Brits, Lithuanians, and Poles, working with Ukrainians. In fact, my soldiers would often talk about what they were learning from the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are also very technically savvy, very adaptive. And what's most interesting to me is how, even though Ukrainians were under Russian and Soviet dominance for so many decades, they have broken free from the philosophy of a very centralized command structure. And in fact, the way they've been fighting is what the Bundeswehr, what the US Army, what the British Army would immediately recognize as decentralized command and control, where you've got small unit leaders fighting in all the different places, whereas the Russians continued their centralized command system, which is why part of the reason so many generals have been killed, because they've had to get more personally involved because subordinate leaders are not making the decisions that need to be made. We've also been reminded watching Ukraine of the power of positive leadership from the example of President Zelensky himself on down. I remember I actually met him 7 weeks ago, just a few days before this Russian offensive started. I was in Kyiv and had about an hour with him. And he's obviously a unique person, not a career politician, but clearly intelligent and very quite a communicator. But even then, I didn't realize how effective he was going to be as a wartime leader, galvanizing support inside Ukraine and outside. And then the determination of Ukrainians to fight, to defend their country was incredible. I mean, you think about Mariupol, that city should have been gone in the first 2 or 3 days. And yet here it is. Still, the Russians have not been able to eliminate all of the resistance that's still there. It's an incredible story to me. And if we, the West, get really serious and have the right sense of urgency, we can do some things to help take more pressure off of the defenders of Mariupol, as well as off of Ukraine at large. The last sort of piece I would want to mention, and again, I'm just doing wave tops here because I really am anxious to get to questions and hear what people want to talk about, is what should Germany be doing? I think Germany, America's most important ally. That doesn't mean Germany is our favorite ally or that we agree with each other all the time, but it's our most important ally because of the economic power, the diplomatic power, Germany's defense of European values, and then, of course, obviously the access that Germany gives the United States Army and Air Force. So for many reasons, Germany is our most important ally. And it's why my president, from the very beginning of his presidency, his administration, reached out to the German government to repair the damage to our relationship from the previous 4 years. But because of that, he also has very high expectations of our German allies, as I suspect all of the listeners here tonight do as well. A few areas, and I'll be brief, and then welcome your challenges or further questions on these. What should Germany be doing? Clearly, number one, a demonstration of commitment by the German government in Berlin to not just keep Ukraine in the fight, but to help Ukraine win. Help Ukraine win. In fact, this is about us. This is our fight. Again, this does not mean Bundeswehr inside Ukraine, but that we are committed to winning here against Russia, to keep the EU focused on helping democracy defeat autocracy. So the priority is not to get to a negotiated settlement. The priority has to be making sure that we get to a settlement that does not lead to another continuation of this in just a few months or next year. To follow through on the commitment by Chancellor Scholz of the 100 billion euro and the 2% commitment, to follow through on this. I was impressed with that the Chancellor did this. And I've asked many German friends since then do they think that the Bundestag will follow through on this? And almost everybody I speak to says, yes, they do believe that people will. I hope that's the case. This is very important. Some practical things that that Germany has to do. I think obviously delivering weapons, ammunition, helping with intelligence, practical things to put in the hands of Ukrainian armed forces so that they can be successful. More broadly, diplomatic pressure from Berlin on Russia and also on China to be involved. Germany is probably the only country on the planet that has the ability and is in a position to wield diplomatic pressure on both Moscow and Beijing. And I hope that they'll do this. Working towards energy independence. Obviously, this is a topic of significant importance here in Germany. I hear about it all the time. There's a lot of things that can be done, but continuing towards energy independence is going to be an important part of this. Communicating with the Russian people. Almost every German business, from whether it's Mittelstand or the larger, has Russian employees. So, I mean, this would be normal. Talk to them. Somehow we have got to penetrate the wall of ignorance or disbelief that's been put up by the Kremlin about what's actually going on, so that Russian people decide to act and do something about this. And then finally, two practical recommendations that are not directly related to Ukraine, but they are about Germany's role inside the alliance. Improve the transportation network. Everybody in NATO depends on Deutsche Bahn. Everybody in NATO will have to move through Germany at some point. But even the great Deutsche Bahn, and specifically DB Cargo, does not have the capacity to deliver what's needed. DB Cargo has enough wagons to move 1.5 armor brigades simultaneously. That's it. That is nothing. So we've got to figure out how to expand DB Cargo. And then missile defense. Unless you just have not been watching the news of the last 7 weeks, all of you can see the role of missiles, attack aircraft, huge threats against cities from the air, whether they're ground delivered rockets and missiles, or air delivered, or from the Russian Navy. And clearly they're going to drop missiles and bombs in every city. And so having the missile defense, air and missile defense capability to protect European citizens and critical infrastructure is key. I think Germany and the Netherlands should be the framework nation for air and missile defense for the Baltic region and Eastern Europe. Okay, with that, Bruno, I'd like to go back to you, and then we can take this however you'd like.
Thank you very much, Ben. This was quite a tour de force through the various challenges and lessons and problems. If I may start with one question, I realized you talked several times about winning. We must win this war. How can we envisage a victory? Is this that the Russians leave the Ukraine in shame, or is Putin removed from his top position? How can we envisage a winning situation for the Ukraine?
So this is the perfect question, and I have an imperfect answer. Of course, both of your suggestions there, I would completely endorse them, but I think those are not practical objectives for us. I was proud when my president said that Putin should not remain in power. And then, of course, his staff immediately tried to walk him back, but then he walked forward again after, and as he should. I mean, the leader of the free world should of course, he's not the president to be the diplomat, he's the president to be the president and to be the moral authority and to point to the whole world and say, look, this guy is a murderer, he's a war criminal. And nobody should be bashful about saying that, and then leave it to the diplomats. You know, there were people around President Reagan when he said that the Soviet Union was an evil empire. I mean, there were people that fainted, you know, almost passed out. They couldn't believe that the president would say something so so harsh. But he was right. It was an organizing thought around which then you build the diplomatic effort. So I'm proud that the president said that. But winning, in my view, has four components. Number one, minimum, the Russians have to go back to the pre-24 February line. There's no way that their aggression should be rewarded with them being able to retain any part of Ukraine that they have seized beginning on 24 February. That means Berdansk, all along the Azov coast, everything that they took since 24 February. Number two, they should bring every Ukrainian back to Ukraine that they relocated. I mean, this is what Stalin did. He moved millions of people, uprooted them and moved them around so that they could not become ethnic challenges or problems to his control. To me, this is got to be a high priority as part of winning, is that Russia agrees to bring them back. You know, I was talking to a friend today whose grandfather was a young soldier in the Wehrmacht that was captured up in Norway by the Soviets and spent the next 5 years in Siberia. And of course, everybody listening here has a relative probably that remembers Konrad Adenauer bringing those soldiers home. However, a few were still remaining. This Russian method of just relocating people somewhere else for their own internal reasons, I think has got to stop. The third component of winning is making sure that Russia is no longer able to threaten its neighbors, specifically Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And by that, I mean, what it's going to take is the use of force by Ukraine to break the back of Russia's ability to continue to launch operations. So that's what I mean by the sense of urgency. We've got to get down those capabilities. And then the fourth component of winning will take the longest amount of time. And so I have no illusion that this is going to happen quickly, is that ultimately Crimea and Donbass are returned to Ukrainian sovereignty, no matter how long that takes. But that has to be the stated objective of the West, just like the eventual reunification of Germany was the goal for all of us in the West. So that's what I think winning looks like. Part of it can happen this year. Obviously, parts of it are going to take much longer.
Okay, thank you. Would you, I think Horst has a question, and then
one addition to that, what you said. You mentioned the Empire. I think you can go back in history a bit more to 1946.
I can't hear you very well. I'm sorry. It's
you mentioned the evil empire, which represented in the 80s, and I think you can go a little bit more back in history, where you can find an answer to Bruno's question: what can be done to win this war? There's a fifth aspect. It was a little bit included in your four elements, but I would like nevertheless ask you to comment on Winston Churchill's sentence, which he said in 1946. And I think the sentence is repeatedly said now by the general, by journalists. Everybody says it in his own or in the same word as Churchill did. I just quoted the sentence. He said in 1946 in Fulton, Missouri, from which I have seen from the Russians' friends during the war, I'm convinced there is nothing they admire more than strength. And there's nothing from which they have less respect than weakness, especially military weakness. So what is your comment on this politics of strength? Is that what we have got to do now, like Reagan also did in the 80s with Chanenko, with Brezhnev and all, and Gorbachev at that time?
That's exactly right. You know, just think about what's happened in the last, well, since 2008. Russia invaded Georgia about the time that the Bundeswehr had almost disarmed. The United States had sent home most of its capability from Europe. The British Army had begun to pull off of the continent to go back to UK. So this idea that somehow we're the ones being provocative is a total fairy tale. It's when we were at our weakest is when Russia felt they could move forward. And they did. They went into Georgia and they saw we did zero. And then they started supporting the Assad regime. And my president, at the time, President Obama said, red line if you use chemical weapons. The Assad regime, enabled by the Russians, jumped over the red line, and we did zero. And then they invaded Crimea in 2014. What did we do? Zero. Very, very minor sanctions that did nothing to change behavior. And so in our weakness, our unwillingness to do something out of a fear that we might somehow provoke the Russians was totally misguided. And that's what has encouraged and enabled them to move forward. So, of course, using strength is something that needs to be done with great care and wisdom. And when you're talking about the world's greatest alliance, to get 30 nations to go together to do this is not easy. But I mean, we know from thousands of years of history that not just the Russians, but any aggressor will exploit weakness when you don't stand up to it. And so I think we are at that point now where we have to use the power of 30 nations of NATO, the combined economic, diplomatic, and military power, to make sure the Russians know that what they're doing, that we're not going to stand by like we did in Srebrenica. We're not going to just stand by and let them continue to murder innocent people.
Okay, thank you very much. We have quite a lot of questions now arising here within our chat, and I want to, if it's okay for you, Mr. Hodges, I want to start reading out the chat notes, the questions. So we have the first question from Till Osenberg. He says, first of all, thank you for sharing us and for being here with us tonight. And he has two questions. He says, might it be a good idea for the Ukrainians to enter Russian territory to interrupt the buildup and restructuring their troops? Would be the first question.
Okay. Und das zweite?
How do you estimate the chance for a serious change in military support of Ukrainian and European military in case we might see a change in government in your country in a couple of years? Thank you.
Okay, two excellent questions. First of all, I hope that we are not preventing Ukraine from striking targets inside Russia, because Russia is launching, most of their missiles are coming from inside Russia. Their Air Force does not even come into Ukraine. It's so dangerous for their aircraft that they stay inside Russian airspace and launch missiles. So it would make no sense for Ukraine to feel, or for us to tell Ukraine, you shouldn't hit a target inside there. They are so vulnerable right now, the Russians, as they try to reconstitute the units that were so badly damaged fighting in the early weeks. So they're vulnerable now. Now is the perfect time to be hitting them so that they're never able to get back up on their feet. Now, the question about what if there is a change of leadership in my country? I'm very worried about this myself. And of course, most of you are familiar with American politics and our current domestic situation. President Biden is not getting credit for, with the exception of inflation, our economy is doing fantastic right now. But he's not getting credit for that. And so we've got a very divided Congress and a divided country. And I imagine that Congress will change hands. This is not so unusual in normal times. And I think whether it's the House and the Senate, but at least one of them probably changes hands here after the midterms. After that, I don't know. The Democrats have a challenge. You know, is it going to be a very old, to be candid, President Biden, or the Vice President Harris, or is there somebody else? I don't believe I don't believe that Mr. Trump will come back as a candidate. The wheels of justice turn slow, but they keep turning. And so I have confidence that I think people are getting tired of his act, frankly. That's what I hope.
Okay, thank you. I think we all do. We quite all do hope so. Thank you very much. So we have a next question. Kurt Hermann is asking, how do you assess the risk of Russia using weapons of mass destruction to eliminate the Ukrainian government?
Very low. I don't think that Russia is going to use chemical weapon, not in any significant way. And I mean, when I say significant, I mean on large scale. And I don't think that they will use a nuclear weapon. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have it in their heart to do it. Clearly, they have supported the use of chemical weapons in the past. Clearly, they have thousands of nuclear weapons, but there's no tactical advantage for them. It will not help them on the battlefield with chemical or nuclear weapon. They already are killing so many people using just what they're already using. So it's not like increasing the rate of murder of civilians is going to change the battlefield. And I think the people that sit at the end of that long table opposite President Putin have got to be thinking there's going to be life after him. And they've got to be thinking, if Russia did decide to use chemical weapons or a nuclear weapon, that would completely change the nature of what we're doing. And I think it would be impossible for the alliance, or at least most nations, to stay out of it at that point. I don't know how we would stand on the sideline if Russia started using chemical weapons or nuclear weapons. For Russia, their nuclear weapons are much more effective if they don't use them, as long as they have us deterring ourselves, that their nukes are effective. A tactical nuclear weapon, it's still a nuclear weapon, but in terms of explosive effect, the damage it can cause is not really anything more than what they're already able to do using the cruise missiles and rockets that they're employing. So I don't see any positive outcome. If I was advising President Putin, I was like, to what end? Why would you do this? Now, again, he would not hold back because of some humanitarian streak in him, but because there's no advantage to it. Only long-term negative outcomes is my view.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now Klaus Wittmann is saying hi to you, Ben. He's saying hi, Ben. Sadly, he has no camera and microphone on his machine, so he greets you impersonally. So, but he's asking as well, in your view, is the Donbass really valuable for Russia, or does its importance lie in denying it to Ukraine?
Well,
That's
Klaus asked a great question. The Donbass is important because controlling it isolates Ukraine from the Azov Sea and on into the Black Sea. I mean, of Ukraine's ports, Mariupol and Berdyansk were both extremely important for grain export, for other materials. And so Ukraine's economy is tied to its ability to export these things. Mykolaiv right now, obviously, you cannot export anything from there. Odessa is in effect blockaded and constantly being hit. So for the Russians, you know, I've always believed that their objective was not to try to just to save Ukrainian people from their Nazi leadership, according to the Kremlin, but it was to destroy Ukraine as a state, to eliminate anything that would enable Ukraine to be a state. And that means wrecking the economy and isolating it from the Black Sea. So that's why I think they want Mariupol so bad, and to deny that region to the Ukrainians.
Okay, thank you very much for answering this question. The next one is from Arno Juncker. And he's writing, we still have not fully understood what Kremlin's disinformation and propaganda campaign has done to the resolve of civil society in Germany over the last decades. The gullibility of the ordinary people is appalling. Moral needs to get up to speed and needs to be sustained. And we have totally lost our Freund-Feind-Kennung and seemingly parts of our moral compass as well. This needs to be stopped. Any ideas and suggestions how we can bring this up to speed?
Well, I think that she has hit on one of the most important aspects of this entire conflict. The Russians are at war with us, even though we and NATO and the West may not think, you know, we're trying to avoid being in war with them. They are in a state of war constantly. And that war goes from nuclear to disinformation and everything in between in varying combinations. And we've allowed ourselves to become vulnerable to this disinformation. I mean, the fact that in the United States, you have millions of people that are still not convinced that the attack on January 6th on the Capitol was an assault on our government, that the Republican National Party would say, well, this is a legitimate political discourse. I mean, that tells you that we have lost our mind and our respect for the institutions necessary for a liberal democratic society. Trust in our election, trust in our court system, trust in the media. And this makes us vulnerable. And I think we have to get back in the business of teaching citizenship and being responsible citizens, that it's more than just voting and paying your taxes, but it's about being involved. Frankly, it's what all three of you do. Your organizations are about helping people understand what's at stake here. How do you protect liberal democratic society? Because we are vulnerable, and the Kremlin sees that. The fact that millions of Americans that watch Fox News, where the top-rated host, Tucker Carlson, basically uses Kremlin talking points. I mean, I can't believe that this is the party of Reagan has embraced this. It's incredible. Or that here in Europe, in the European Union, a country like Hungary, or Marine Le Pen, who could possibly be the French president here in a couple of weeks, embraces Putin. So we have a real challenge. And of course, we had a demonstration here in Frankfurt just the other day, Russian supporters. There was a huge demonstration in Berlin a few weeks ago. Of course, this is the right to be able to do this. But the fact that there are so many people doing it causes me to be concerned. I've got good friends that still question these pictures from Bucha, like, oh, that could be staged. Nobody, serious person, believes that was staged, but there are people that are willing to accept that. So we have a challenge.
Okay, so we have one other question that is directing on energy independence from Heiko Brendel. He is from Scientists for Future. So a little bit of another drop of another perspective now in this questions in this talk. You mentioned the energy independence earlier. Which importance has Western Europe's energy autarky for NATO? So, meaning no energy imports from Russia, but also LNG gas imports from Qatar or hydrogen imports from Saudi Arabia, he's asking.
Yeah, this is such an important question, and it has so many different political sensitivities around it. I'm old enough to have lived through the big oil embargo back in the 70s, and I can remember hundreds of cars lined up at gas stations. I think here in Germany in the 70s, you also there was no driving on Sunday or something like that. So, I mean, we've been through things like this before, and probably we're facing those possibilities again, which is which is not terrible. I mean, the fact that we may have to do some things, changing lifestyle to deal with this is a possibility. I think everybody here listening tonight, our parents went through that, whether it was during the Depression or the war or right after the war. Now, easy to say, harder to do. I think Germany has important decisions to make. As a sovereign country, you made the decision to get off of nuclear power. You've made the decision to significantly reduce coal. And at the same time now, we're having.
Can you please turn off your micros, all the participants, please, because otherwise we have some disturbance in the sound. Please turn off your micros. Thank you. Except you, Mr. Hodges.
I think many people would like me to turn it on.
No. It's not that far.
I think that's Herr Fischer. So anyway, so Germany has made decisions like any sovereign country about nuclear power, about coal, and now you're looking at the possibility of.
Mr. Schuster, Klaus Schuster, could you turn off your microphone, please? Yeah.
Okay. So these are tough choices, and when I've talked to my German friends about how can you support Nord Stream 2, and the response I immediately got was, "Oh, come on, this is just the Americans trying to get LNG market share in Europe. That's what this is about." And so there was a degree of skepticism, which I completely understand. I think Qatar actually is in a place to really make a difference here. I was in Doha about 4 weeks ago on the margins of the economic forum there, and they are in an interesting place where they can play an important role as a supplier, not just to Europe, but to others that need it as well. I think at the end of the day, all of us have to make decisions, including my own country, about the vulnerability to if we're not energy independent, or if we only have one source. I mean, you could make an argument that the United States ended up fighting 2 wars in Iraq because we were still reliant on oil from the Middle East. And the first one turned out well, the second one not so well. So in the United States, we have a huge political debate now about fracking, about the pipeline from Canada down to the Gulf. I mean, these are significant, legitimate debates, people on both sides. Germany will have to decide how it's going to manage this. I think there are solutions, but it probably does mean changing lifestyles to some degree.
Okay, thank you. Maybe let us turn to more NATO-oriented questions, as we have also an expert on NATO here as well. Maybe we can also turn into a dialogue.
I should
together.
add, I'm sorry, I need to add one tiny thing to my last answer. Many of the listeners may be surprised. As an American, I do not drive a big pickup truck here in Germany. I have a Fiat Cinquecento, so I'm doing my part also.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. That's good to know. Okay, so let me have a look. So Walter Huhn, he asks, in your book, you pointed out that NATO's much touted, enhanced and tailored forward presence in Eastern and Southeastern Europe is just a bluff due to a dramatic imbalance of forces. Would you still stick to this position, or is NATO today in a better position to counter likely Russian attempts to establish new centers of gravity, such as the Baltic states' boundaries? Is Walter Huhn asking.
That's a fair question. The deployment of the EFP, Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Groups, into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland after the NATO summit in Warsaw in 2016 was an important step. I mean, it put real capability on the ground, not decisive, but the fact that they were multinational was a message to the Kremlin that this is not just Germany, the US, UK, and Canada, but it was all of NATO, that if you attacked any Baltic country or Poland, you were taking on the entire alliance. So that was important. That was symbolic, but it was important. But as we have observed, Russia's, how they fight and what they're willing to do, we realize that what was there was not enough. And I think the decision to have enhanced forward presence in the north, but tailored forward presence in the Black Sea region was misguided. Because the biggest threat actually is in the Black Sea region. That's where all the frozen conflicts are. And yet that was the place where we put the least amount of capability and commitment. So one of the outcomes of this war in Ukraine is that I believe the alliance is going to increase its presence along the entire eastern flank from Estonia down through at least Romania. I think you're going to see permanent basing. The alliance recognized that our good faith effort at living up to the NATO-Russia Founding Act did not result in good behavior by the Russians. So I think we're going to walk away from that, and you're going to see something that looks like permanent basing. I don't know that the US is going to have permanent troops in Romania and Poland, but I think you're going to see establishment of installations that are there that are US, which is what we've done in Korea for the last 70 years, where the troops come for 1-year tours, but the camps are by and large permanent. And what I think we need is more enablers, air and missile defense, logistics, all the heavy stuff that's hard to get into place. The easy things to move are the infantry, the armor, those can move more quickly. It's the other stuff that's much more difficult. And I think for effective deterrence, having those, what we call enablers, logisticians, air defense, headquarters, that sort of thing, getting those permanently established would do a lot to improve our deterrence, to include down in the Black Sea region. I think this is coming. Now, I will say, while I was critical of the EFP, the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group in that book, the fact that Germany was the first nation to stand up and say in 2016, we will take responsibility to be a framework nation for the battle group in Lithuania, and then that the Bundeswehr was the first to deploy. I think this was so significant. It put a lot of pressure on other European countries that when Germany does this, then people cannot hide behind Germany. They have to follow through also. I thought that was important. And of course, if Finland, as it's beginning to look, does ask to join the alliance, then this is going to significantly change the entire security structure along NATO's eastern flank as well, making it even more, I think, more compelling, better deterrent effect.
Could
Yes.
I chime in here?
Sure.
Can you give
I have to hand.
No. I just have a quick question in between. To me, there's a huge irony as an outcome of the Russian aggression, a renewed unity of the West, as we haven't seen it for quite some time, for many years actually. And right now there is talk of Finland and Sweden being given fast-track entry into NATO. I'm sure you would agree to this, that this is a continuation of the show of strength and determination by the West. But on the other hand, wouldn't you see this as a potential exacerbation of Russia's feeling of being reined in and of being threatened?
Well, of course, Bruno, they will not like it. But keeping the Kremlin happy should not be our top diplomatic priority, or allowing President Putin to, have something to cheer about on 9 May in Red Square. I think you use exactly the right word, the irony. I mean, I wrote down 6 things that are going to be negative outcomes because of his decision, which was totally unnecessary. I mean, there was no need for Russia to invade Ukraine. They had so much pressure on Ukraine's economy that probably the economy was going to collapse within the next few months, which would lead to the collapse of the Zelensky government. The Kremlin could have got their own guy in there. There never would have been a casualty. There never would have been a sanction. So this whole thing was unnecessary, as I look at it, for the Kremlin. Yet they did it. So what are the results? As you correctly state, our alliance is still not perfect, but it's rejuvenated. I mean, the level of training and intensity is as good as I have seen in many, many years, and the willingness of sharing intelligence. I've never seen us share intelligence like this. The decision by the Biden administration, working with Berlin and London and Brussels, to share information, that for the first time in my life, I think we had the advantage on the information narrative over the Kremlin, instead of us always having to react to them by exposing them because of the intelligence that was being shared. And I'm sure all the intelligence professionals were having heart attacks. They can't stand this, but it was a very clever way, I think, to use intelligence to seize the narrative. So that to me is a manifestation of the unity of the alliance. German defense spending. I mean, talk about irony that it's the Greens driving the SPD to increase defense spending, and not like, incremental, but like in a big way. So I think enough people in Berlin recognize that Germany's position as the champion of the gesamte Europäische Friedensordnung was disappearing if they did not act. And I think this was one of the ironic outcomes of Putin's attack. Finland and Sweden, as you talked about. I mean, the Finns, there was an American congressman asked the Finnish president one time, he said, "How many Russians are in Finland?" And the president of Finland said, "About 50,000. And the congressman said, "What?" And he goes, "Yes, but they're all 6 feet underground." So the Finns are a welcome, would be a valuable addition to the alliance. Russia lost Ukraine. I mean, despite historical friction and differences and so on, the fact is they shared a religion, they share a history, and they were neighbors. And millions of Ukrainians have family members in Russia and vice versa. That's gone forever. They have, because of Putin, they have completely lost that. Now, he now has over 40 million Ukrainians that absolutely detest Moscow. Russia's economy is going to be in tatters for a very long time. Now, I know there are still plenty of people that have billions of euro tucked away somewhere. People will always find ways. We have, unbelievably, some American businesses under the Koch brothers that still are engaged in Russia, which is makes me quite unhappy. But still, in the long run, their economy, and then finally their access, their membership in international organizations, their reputation is in tatters. It's hard to imagine Lavrov being invited to Berlin to a cocktail party, or to Brussels or New York. Certainly Putin, I mean, he can go to Sochi all he wants, or to Pyongyang, but I don't know where else he's going to be able to go.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hodges. We just would have to do a quick checkup about your time that you have for us, the resting time, because we have seen quite a few questions in the chat. You see, it's all the most interesting for the people to listen to your explanations and to your experience, but also Mr. Dörrenbecher wants to pose one or the other question. So you are with us until 7:45. Is that correct?
4:45.
Super.
So I try to be very short. I don't know if you know that old saying, probably it's the beginning of the most NATO talks in the world, that an Englishman bought Izmir said.
Mikro, das ist zu leise.
Wir müssen es höher machen, das Mikro, oder halt in die Hand nehmen.
So, it's so. Do you get me? A little bit. Yes. Is it better now? Fine. Well, you know that old saying, Lord Ismay said, the NATO is there to keep the Americans in, to keep the Russians out and the Germans down. If you look at the situation now, that Germany is now getting very, very, very up in many military respects, don't you think that one day perhaps Americans or European partners will say, oh, the Germans are overdoing, we shouldn't let them go so much up, a little bit control is probably better. And the other aspect of my question is that there are two outstanding academics, Professor Herfried Münkler and Professor Christian Hagel, said some time ago that Germany should prepare to get in the possession of nuclear weapons. That's all.
Well, first of all, I think the famous saying by Lord Ismay is no longer applicable. I mean, that was decades ago, and in the early years after the war. We're in a completely different environment right now. I think that Germany has a moral obligation, for the first time in its history, has only friends on all of its borders. And so as a security contributor, there's a moral obligation to do more. Now, that doesn't mean 12 divisions in the Bundeswehr, although that would suit me fine, but that's maybe not necessary. But Germany's role within the alliance, the responsibility to make sure that everything that you are already paying for, the Luftwaffe, the Marine, the Army, that it works. I mean, that everything you have functions, that units are full of people, that they're trained, what we call readiness. So that is the first priority. And that's not a large Bundeswehr. So nobody would see this as a threat, not a serious person. I think that in my conversations with my friends in Poland, in France, in Baltic countries, they're all a little tired of hearing about Germany saying, oh, our history, and people would be worried if we decided to. I think people are tired of that, and it's no longer a relevant argument. But I would also put it in a different light as well. It's impressive to me that the Bundeswehr goes nowhere without a mandate from the Bundestag. So there's no way, unlike France, there's no way that the Bundeskanzler can send off 10th Panzer Division to do something without a mandate from the Bundestag. That's impressive. So if the Bundestag is going to give a mandate for the young women and men of the Bundeswehr to go somewhere, then it seems to me a moral obligation to make sure that they have the best possible chance to accomplish the mission and to come back alive. So in other words, the best possible equipment, the best possible training, all of these things is a moral obligation that goes hand in hand with that parliamentary mandate. So nobody was worried about the German Bundeswehr when it had 12 divisions and thousands of howitzers. Nobody was worried about it then. So this somehow in the last 20 years, this sense that somehow, we can't have a large German military. Nobody was worried during the Cold War at all, except maybe the Soviets. So I think it's overdue. And from a slightly cynical side, and this will be my last point, is that it makes it harder for people like Trump to complain that Germans are not doing their, and he feeds into a part of the American population that gets frustrated with that. Why are these Europeans doing more? no matter how clueless they may be, they still vote. And so seeing allies fulfill their responsibility to be candid also helps make sure that people like Trump don't end up in power again.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have another question by Yannick Lasshoff, Büro Philipp Krämer. This question is more related to the Western Balkan, to the Balkan regions, which could be also quite interesting. He says, "Dear Lieutenant General Hodges, what is your assessment regarding Russia potentially opening a second geopolitical front in Western Balkans by backing up proxies? The Republic of Srpska is seeking secession from Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, obviously backing these aspirations, procuring some air defense from China. So do you hold KFOR and OIFOR Althea effective means to prevent a new escalation in Southeastern Europe?"
Great question. For years, I've been hearing people talk about time to get K4 home, bring it out. What a huge mistake that would be. The K4 costs nothing compared to, I mean, in the great scheme of things, K4, the Kosovo force, is pennies. The United States contribution, we depend on our National Guard to be there. But I once had the Serbian army chief and the Albanian chief of defense both told me, please don't take K4 out. It is the only anchor of stability in the region. So it's an example, it's not perfect, but it's an example of a small commitment of NATO to a region that acts as has a moderating effect. It's a presence, it shows a commitment that we care because we're putting our young women and men there. So I think to remove K4 would be a colossal mistake. But K4 by itself is not the solution. As with the Black Sea region, we, the West, NATO, EU, United States, need to have a strategy where we compete in all domains, not militarily, but diplomacy, information, economy. If we don't, the countries you just named, China and Russia, step right in and fill that vacuum. Last time I was in Belgrade, I was driving from the old part of the city to the new part of the city, crossed over the river, and the first two big giant billboards that I see, one says Huawei, the other said Gazprom. And that, I mean, they were massive billboards. That's the competition. And what we in the United States tend to do when it comes to countries like the Balkans or even in the Caucasus, we tend to surf in and out. There's not a sustained level of interest because we haven't made the case or we don't understand why it's to our benefit that we invest there, that there's a presence there, that we keep these countries oriented towards the West. That's the hard part. That's to lay that out strategically is hard to make a compelling case sometimes to our legislators.
Okay, to stay with some bordering or nearby countries or with regional geopolitical strategies, Sam Elsey, I would like to give you an answer also by Sam Elsey. I don't want to skip it because there have been quite a few questions posed by him. He says, "Dear General Hodges, to avoid an awful situation like this one in the future, the West will have to guarantee and or strengthen Moldova and Georgia, two countries against whom Russia has a casus belli and is consistently supporting dissidents. What is your position on this and how can this be done?"
Yeah, very interesting question. Georgia and Moldova are both under immense pressure. But they have a responsibility themselves. You know, in Moldova, the president, Ms. Sandu, she's an impressive woman, but she's in a country that is just totally corrupt, and she's got a challenge. So she needs help. But the Russians are managed to keep pressure on them because of the approximately 2,000 soldiers they have in Transnistria. In Georgia, you've got 20% of the country, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, still occupied by Russian soldiers, more than a decade after the so-called Sarkozy Agreement, where Russia should have long since departed. Well, they haven't. So why is this? Because there is zero pressure from Europe or the United States for Russia to live up to agreements, to respect sovereignty, zero pressure. And so until we decide that this is important, then these so-called frozen conflicts are going to remain in place. Now, I mentioned the importance earlier of a strategy for the greater Black Sea region. Georgia is not an island. Ukraine is not an island. These countries are important because of where they sit on the map. The Black Sea as a buffer against Iran, preventing Russia from using the Black Sea as its launching pad to support the murderous Assad regime. The economic potential of the East-West economic corridor between Europe and Eurasia. There's so many reasons why this area is strategically important. Russia, of course, does not want to see us get involved economically. Georgia is in the US what we call backsliding. It was like they had gotten up to a point where it looked like they really were going to have strong democratic, the pillars of a liberal democratic society, but they've not been able to sustain that. And I think part of that's because the United States has not remained consistently in support. It's not been a part of a strategic approach. And when we don't have that, then the Russians fill it in. So both of these countries are going to continue to be under the Russian thumb until we get serious about helping them have sustained liberal democracy. By the way, I don't know if you know, some of your listeners may know that the Georgian Parliament building was built by German soldiers, prisoners after the war that the Soviets kept. They used German forced labor to build the Parliament building there in Tbilisi.
Okay, thank you very much. I've just written one of the last remarks into the chat. Someone who wants to come up with a very urgent question and who wants to be answered, who wants to have answered his or her question very urgently, should right now, or maybe also open the micro for a very short question. Otherwise, if that's not the case, I would say that maybe Bruno or Horst Dürrenbecher have some questions here at this point.
Yeah, but perhaps first we should ask the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have Niels Huberti. He is EU youth delegate. It's very good to have the youth voices here also on board. And he says, dear Lieutenant General Hodges, furthermore, how do you think this war will affect the European striving towards strategic autonomy?
What an interesting question. I think it will have the opposite effect. I think this war reminds all of us, including the United States, of how much we need each other. And when we look at the expense and the requirements of modern warfare, I mean, this is not Mali, this is not Afghanistan, this is a massive, very lethal conflict that's underway. And I don't think even the most ardent European autonomy advocates wants to get into a conflict with Russia or get into a situation where the United States is not closely involved. But I think also the United States is once again reminded of our absolute total dependence on Europe and European allies, to be able to have the luxury of flying in and out of European air bases, of being able to move troops from their base in Vilzek or Baumholder or Grafenwehr or Vicenza, to move them quickly. This is a huge strategic benefit for us. So I don't think the war will do anything to spur movement towards more strategic autonomy.
Okay, so I have one very quick question here. Heiko Brendel says, maybe the wrong question to an army general, but still important. How do you estimate effective NATO and Russian naval power in the Baltic Sea? This could be of importance when Sweden and Finland would join the NATO.
That's a great question. And I love questions about the Navy. I love our Navy, except when we play them in football. Then I don't like them very much. But look, our Navy is way overstretched. We don't have the ability to get enough ships into the Black Sea or the Baltic Sea is not enough. We absolutely don't have enough. And so there's another area where I think it would help, obviously, Finland and Sweden adding more capability in the Baltic Sea. Although I will say there was a lot of cooperation already. So it's actually in a pretty good place. I think Germany has offered to host a Baltic Maritime Component Command. I hope that NATO will accept this offer. Germany is the right nation to lead maritime operations in the Baltic Sea. We need a headquarters that wakes up in the morning smelling the Baltic Sea air. And I think Rostock is the place for that headquarters.
Okay, thank you very much.
Let me just put this on. I'm sure the Western military looks very closely at the movements of the Russian army, at, shall I say, the failures or blunders of the command. What do you think can the West or the Western military learn from this war?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, Bruno, is the absolute essential importance of readiness. To have units that are not ready to do their tasks. I mean, what we're seeing, there are thousands of young Russian boys are being killed because they are not ready. Their leaders are sending them into a battle where they are absolutely not ready. And no matter what country they are from, these are still young men from families that are being slaughtered because they were thrown into a battle for which they were not ready. They were not trained, not properly equipped. So this is a good reminder to us of the criminal aspect of sending our young women and men into a fight when they are not properly prepared, not trained, don't have the best equipment, they're not employed effectively. That's an important reminder. Secondly, the transparency, not perfection, but the transparency of Western institutions where you have congressional oversight or the Bundestag or the British Parliament. This is important. I mean, otherwise you end up with the results that we're seeing from Russian forces, the absolute total corruption. You know, they advertised they had about 900,000 soldiers. I doubt they have 500,000. But this is an old technique to get money, is you claim that you have so many soldiers and then you get money for payroll and you pocket the money. Or the lack of a quality control over production of different things. So we're being reminded of that. More practically, the importance of realistic training. These Russian generals that are being killed, most of them are getting killed because they're talking on a cell phone, on Ukrainian cell service. I mean, that's unbelievable that's what's happening. But the reason it's happening is because they lack operational experience. They don't train to the same level of rigor that the Bundeswehr, the US Army at Grafenwehr, for example, or Hohenfels, or the British Army that we train to, where you would know if you talk on a cell phone, it's going to be intercepted and you're going to have a rocket land on top of your tent or your head. That's why they're being killed. So we're being reminded again of the importance of tough, realistic training. Otherwise, you end up making these kind of mistakes. And then I think the last two things, I alluded to them in the beginning, the amount of ammunition that is consumed is through the roof. Much more in actual wartime than you would ever expect from an exercise, or even when you're doing just your calculations in the headquarters. The problem, none of us, including the United States Army, has enough ammunition because it is very expensive. And nobody wants to have a $500,000 missile sitting in a bunker in Misau and never be used. So these are decisions that our ministries and our governments have to make about, okay, well, if you don't have it, then you're going to pay the price some other way. And I think that's important. And then finally, air and missile defense. Just watching every day, literally hundreds of missiles and jets are flying through Ukrainian airspace, slamming into cities, murdering innocent people. I think that we've got to get serious about this, and I think this is a role that Germany can play.
Thank you very much, Ben. What can I say? This was absolutely great. Thanks to the audience for showing up, for taking the time, for showing an interest, for sending us questions. And Ben, you must have felt like you were in a Senate hearing. You survived, and I think we learned a lot from all this. And again, it showed how great a partner you are in discussions and debates. We're going to put this video up on our website and on Facebook. And let me advertise another meeting. Ben, you're going to, or you will also be on a Zoom meeting with the German-American Institute Nordrhein-Westfalen in Cologne. For the audience who is interested in another meeting, check this out, Amerika Haus Nordrhein-Westfalen. Well, again, Ben, thank you very, very much for taking the time and for enlightening us and for giving us your opinions and your thoughts about the Russian aggression in Ukraine.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you for the privilege, really. And this was a lot more pressure than the Senate hearing, because General Rams is sitting there watching, and he's tougher than any American senator. So this was more pressure.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope to see you again someday. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks for
much
coming.
on our side as well.
Schönen Abend noch.
Schönen Abend. Auf Wiedersehen.